Ecology is a very broad topic that includes any and all ways that organisms interact with each other and the environment. It can be studied at many different levels, including individual organisms, populations, communities, ecosystems, landscapes, which refers to connected ecosystems, and globally. We will be looking at several of these areas of ecology. Biotic factors are the living factors in an ecosystem and includes all organisms that are a part of the environment. This includes the obvious things like plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and protists, but also includes factors such as predators, parasites, pathogens, competitors, and food availability. Abiotic factors are the non-living components of an ecosystem that affect or influence organisms. These are the chemical and physical factors such as temperature, light, water, and nutrients. These factors, both biotic and abiotic, can affect where organisms live. For example, in this experiment, scientists were looking to see what effect limpets and sea urchins have on the amount of seaweed in an ecosystem. They did tests where both limpets and sea urchins were removed, as well as ones where only one of them were removed. So if we look at this graph, you can see that the control involved both urchins and limpets being present, and you see a very low amount of seaweed growth. When both are removed, you see a much greater amount of seaweed growth. So then we want to see which one has the greatest impact, limpets or urchins. So when you remove just the limpets, we again see very little seaweed growth. So limpets do not appear to have a very big impact on seaweed. But when we remove just the urchins, we see a dramatic increase in seaweed cover. So we can see from this data that sea urchins, which are a biotic factor, have a tremendous impact on seaweed growth in this particular environment. Now, when you look at this map of the distribution of red kangaroos in Australia, you may notice that most of the kangaroos are found in the interior parts of Australia within this dashed area here, which are much drier and not in the coastal areas that tend to be wetter. This would suggest that their distribution is due to an abiotic factor, the amount of precipitation. However, it could also be due to biotic factors such as food availability or predators, so ecologists would have to look at this more closely to see which factor has the greatest impact on red kangaroo distribution. To do that, ecologists may use a flowchart similar to this one to figure out what factors are actually influencing the distribution of a species. So they can look at why a species is absent from a particular area. Is it due to behavior? Is it due to habitat selection, which might involve biotic factors or abiotic factors? So they can use this flow chart to kind of narrow down why an organism may or may not be in a particular area. Here we can see the effect that the curve of Earth has on temperatures at different latitudes. What we see is at the equator here, the sun is more directly striking Earth at that location, and so temperatures will be fairly high and constant. Whereas at the poles, you get a much lower angle of sunlight striking Earth, and so those areas tend to see cooler temperatures. And so we can see that that angle then, the angle that the sunlight is striking Earth, has a tremendous impact on the temperatures in those regions of the Earth. Another major factor that influences temperature globally is the tilt of Earth on its axis. Earth is actually tilted at a 23.5-degree angle, and so as Earth revolves around the sun, different portions of Earth, different parts of the Earth are pointed towards or away from the sun at any given time. And that is what gives us our seasons. So when the northern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun, we are in our winter months. But at that same time, in the southern hemisphere, they're experiencing summer because they are tilted more towards the sun. And then conversely for us, when we are tilted in the northern hemisphere towards the sun, that is our summer, but the southern hemisphere is experiencing their winter. So seasons are determined by the tilt of Earth on its axis, and that's why northern hemisphere and southern hemispheres have seasons that are alternating in terms of time. Here in this picture, we see what's known as the ocean conveyor belt. And what's significant about this is if we consider what temperatures should be at these upper latitudes, we would expect them to be very cold up there. So places like England should be quite cold. The reason why they have a more temperate temperature, a more moderate temperature, is because of this ocean conveyor belt. The ocean conveyor belt picks up warm water at the equator, carries it up to England, and distributes the heat into the atmosphere up there. And then once the heat has dissipated from the water, the cooler water sinks back towards the bottom of the ocean, and the current carries it back southward, and it loops back around and picks up warm air once again when it gets to the equator. So this continuous movement of the water and the ability of water to hold heat, which we'll talk about in our next unit, allows those northern areas that should be very cold to be much more moderate temperatures. What we're looking at here is what's called a rain shadow desert. So what happens in this scenario is we're looking at differences in local climate because of something topographical, in this case a mountain range. So you wouldn't normally, this close to a coast especially, expect to find deserts. But what happens is when you have a mountain range that's close to the coast, on the windward side of the mountain is where most of the precipitation is going to fall. And in a way, it kind of blocks the precipitation from getting over the mountain. And so on the leeward side then of the mountain, you have a desert form. So it's a location that would not normally be a desert, but because of the mountain range, you get a desert. And so that is a way that the local topography can change the local climate. So what we've looked at here today is different ways that biotic and abiotic factors can affect distribution of organisms.